Welcome to a new episode of the Creative Industry Insight podcast. I'm your host, Bobby. For our second and third guests from Apple TV's Masters of the Air, we welcome Dialect coaches Helen Ashton and Bret Tyne. Helen and Brett will talk us through what their role on the show entails, and they will also highlight how important dialect is for a period set show. Please be warned, there are heavy spoilers in this episode. Now let's jump into the conversation with Helen and Brett. Hi, Helen and Brett. Thank you for joining me today.
Hi, thanks for having us.
Thank you.
We're here to talk about Masters of the Air, which is streaming at the moment on Apple TV Plus. What can I say about the show? Like, it's pretty epic. It's pretty big scale. I think it's feels weird to have such a big show on your TV now. I don't know if you guys feel that as well.
Yeah, it does feel epic. It does feel like it's sort of, well, I guess the people who made it, but it does feel like it's out of the Saving Private Ryan, these huge cinematic events, but on your TV screen.
It was certainly epic making it. It was 10 months of filming and so much post-production. It was a long haul, and everyone was so excited to see it finally out.
Yeah, as well with like there's these sort of shows where as like average like viewer, you don't realize how much work goes. You think about the filming part, but then once that's done, you don't realize how much work goes afterwards just to get it prepped and out and have everybody have everybody sort of working on it to get it ready to air, really.
It's a massive operation. It really is. I mean, we're involved in post-production usually just for the ADR, but nothing beyond that. But you then get a sort of sense of all the mixing and the special effects and the everything. It's enormous. It becomes a whole new movie, really. The people involved in post.
But even just the shoot itself, I don't think I've ever worked on anything of that scale. Even when we were doing it, it felt absolutely enormous, absolutely epic. So many people, so many incredible sets and builds, and just so many actors, so many people doing an accent. I mean, it was huge.
We'll get to it about working with such a big cast, but we're kind of in a special position here because you two are my first dialect coaches on the podcast. So it's quite exciting having a different department on. But before we jump into the project, what is a dialect coach and what does the role entail?
Very honoured to be your first dialect coaches on the podcast. So a dialect coach works with the actors to work out how their character would speak. That's basically what we do. So we speak with directors, with producers about what their sort of expectations are and hopes and dreams for how the actors will sound. We read the scripts, we mine them for any sort of clues about where a character's from, what the time period is, all of that information. And then we generally come on board in an ideal world, we generally come on board kind of pretty early on during the casting process. And as actors are cast, we then start to work with them alongside, any physical training or fittings, things like that. As the actor is starting to uncover who this character is, they're working with a dialect coach to find out, okay, if that's who this person is, how does that person speak? So yeah, that's broadly speaking what we do. It's the work that you do on an accent with an actor is muscle work. You're working with the way somebody speaks is shaped by their body. So it's the way they breathe, it's the way the tongue moves, the lips move, the cheeks move, all that stuff. So like anything physical, it takes a bit of time. So it's a process. We have to begin early once somebody's cast and have quite a few weeks before a shoot begins to really embed new habits into a person's body so that they can kind of use the accent naturally and fluently rather than thinking about it too hard. So yeah, we work through prep with the actors generally quite regularly. And then once the shoot begins, the work of a dialect coach is just really to be there to support the actors and just to, I guess, be a bit of a backstop. So, you've done the work with the actors, they know what they're doing, they understand their character by that point, but then the cameras roll and there's blocking and there's stunts and there's, a million different things going on. So we're just there on the day to kind of do a warm up with the actors, to listen as the scene unfolds, and if anything just needs a little tweak, to dash in and give the actor a little discreet note. Or often things, we know how it is, and often things do change on the day. So we're there as well to attend a rehearsal, and if there are new lines, to just make sure the actor's comfortable with how those would sound in the accent. So yeah, that's pretty much, I think, what a dialect coach does. As Bret says, we're usually a department of one, usually just one of us on a production. So that's what this was, such a treat, this job, because for once we were not a department of one. We had a colleague that we could, to have Bret, and we could bounce ideas off each other and just have a second pair of ears that was a real gift on this job.
And to sort of design it together, to research it together, and to craft how it was going to be. I mean, there were so many actors. I think there were 325 speaking roles. And so you have to work through all of that over months. And it was shot in blocks. So the first block was the first 4 episodes. And as it went on, new actors kept coming in. So you were constantly working with those on set and then prepping the new ones. So there was so much work involved. It was really a, full-time and some job. It was a job that required 2 coaches. It was never going to be able to be just one coach. It was just two units going to, probably could have had more even, but it was really great to be able to sort of work on it together, prep it together, design it together, and then start teaching together.
When you work, because you said it's usually just one dialect coach on a film, what's the workflow like when there's 2 of you working with so many people?
Well, we had our process, we were really lucky on this, that we had, I don't know, Helen, I feel like we had 4 weeks of prep on this, actually researching who these men were and where they were all from, because they're all based on real people. And we just sort of divided and conquered. We listened to real audio recordings of interviews of the real men, Crosby, Kidd, Blakely, Hamilton, Cruikshank, whatever we could get our hands on. And then we had books that we had, obviously Masters of the Air, but then we had a book called The Story of the Century, which had a lot of guys indexed in the back of it, where they were, who they were and where they were from. So we had to really find out where everyone was from so that we could give them the right sound. So we literally divided and conquered, and we had this epic spreadsheet. I mean, I think it was about 16 pages of all the cast, their positions, where they were from regionally, and then their position of playing, their education, their age. It was extraordinary. So we started to, once we knew where they were from, we then sort of broke down the United States in, I think we had 5 regions and 4 major cities. And we started to craft breakdowns, period breakdowns, because it was also the 40s. And we gave each actor a Word document with information that we'd found through research on them, and with a link to a fieldwork recording from the University of Wisconsin. They did these fieldwork recordings in 1965 to 70, I think. So we tried to, you can plug in states, and we would try to find a sound sample that was age appropriate for the guys from the closest place to where they were from. So age and close to their education. So every actor was armed with something to listen to that was set in the right time. And then we've made these breakdowns for the 1940s, and we sort of double checked sounds. We sort of dorked out and read linguistic papers, and we had this book, the Dictionary of American Regional English, and we would just check that sound shifts had not occurred then that are around now. And we did these breakdowns, and it was just epic. So then we gave each actor a breakdown when we first started working with them. And Helen was really very forensic with the breakdowns. And
well, we were both very forensic. We were obsessed with it. But yeah, so we went these breakdowns, which kind of went through every key sound in an accent. So each vowel, each consonant, and we would make up sentences which were kind of specific to Air Force things, but focused on each sound. So, you know, if I can remember any of them, I don't know if I can. That's where I did pull up the document so I could tell you one of them.
we tried to make the sentences, relevant to stuff they had to say about flying or the
yeah,
war.
exactly. Yeah.
We got
I can't find it now. It's too dorky anyway. But yes, so yeah, we did that, and then so we would have sessions with the guys working through these breakdowns, making sure they could comfortably say each of the vowels, each of the consonants. And if you can kind of say a sentence that's just full of the same sound over and over again, then really when you get to a real sentence, that's much easier to say because it's not a tongue twister. So we would go through that with the guys, and then once they were comfortable, that's when you'd then kind of bring in script and start to look at their dialogue, because you don't want to spend too much time on dialogue unless it gets a bit sort of stale, you know.
Yeah, and then in boot camp, the production was great. They knew how important this was. They knew that were casting largely, I think out of the 325, there were only 11 Americans. And so they knew that they were casting people, largely British boys. And so they really gave us the time and the infrastructure with which to work. And so during boot camp, they put the dialect in to their boot camp regime. So they would come to us, and we had a little porta cabin with an upstairs and a downstairs. And so we had a whiteboard and a map of the United States, and each actor would come in and they'd get a pin and they'd stick in where they were from, and we would go to work, and it was just rotating, revolving doors every day for their I think they did boot camp for 2 weeks or 3 weeks. And then once we started rolling, we would just go in and, as Helen said, give them the support that they needed.
But what was great having the two of us, once we started shooting, was that so if one of us was on set for the day, the other one could be doing sessions with actors who weren't in that day. So because there were just so many of them, it was difficult to get enough time with them in prep. So during the shoot, if they weren't called to work that day, we could do dialect, and so we'd be on Zoom, the other coach, doing dialect sessions, prepping them for the upcoming weeks ahead, which was great because generally when there's just one of you, you get the odd little bit of downtime, but when there are scenes with no dialogue or something like that happening on set, that you could step off and do some prep with an actor. But this just gave us a lot more leeway to be able to keep sort of ahead with the prep.
And we had to do that because of the volume of the people and the speed at which we were filming was just, racing forward.
So there's a lot to take from that answer, and I've got a few follow-ups that is quite interesting to hear about the whole process about going from the sort of prep period to the shooting period and what everything and what it entails. I think the first bit is like the research period where you're going through all these different documents, these sounds and the way that certain words and phrases might be said, but then also probably keeping an eye out for certain words that might not be used or slang words during that time, and being very period specific. I think it's like crazy probably to think as well how different words probably have different meanings now to what they did before then. So even if somebody was saying one word that they might not probably say now compared to what they used to say back in those days, there's probably something that you might need to catch or have someone not slip out of there when they're sort of performing the scenes as well.
We watched a lot of films from the 30s and 40s, and we listened to radio programs and news reels, and we sort of immersed ourselves in that time period. And then we made a slang document that got given to all, distributed to all the boys, and then it got updated for, it just was it was a work in progress. And so they were all armed with period phrases and words. And so anytime they wanted to improvise or, ad lib, which of course there's a lot of that with a shoot that size and all the background stuff going on. So we were always listening deep, trying to listen deep into the background to make sure someone wasn't saying anything modern or, and the directors were generally, really into all of this. So they would say, is that period? Can we say this? Is that going to work? And the boys were very good too. They would come up and ask us, I wanted to say something like this. What's a appropriate way to say it? So it was we were really in it. We had slang, we were carrying around slang dictionaries and thesauruses and a library on our backs just to be armed with, to be prepared for the question. Is that period?
I was going to say, we had all these books, the amazing books that you would never know existed, but yeah, thesauruses of slang, which tell you which years a certain thing was in usage. And so we'd be standing there and the director would say, oh, I'd really like it, this guy's being sick. I'd really like it if we could have some slang words about being sick. Did they say bath in this period? Did they say puke? Did they say, and you should say, 1 moment, please. And you get up the slang thesaurus and have a look, what year did they start using these words,
I know. And then you can get even dorkier where it's like an Australian slang or British slang or American slang. You have to make sure that that was said by the right nationality. It gets really nerdy, but it's fun. It was very fun to immerse ourselves in that universe. People were very creative with language then, let's just say. Very creative.
I guess like when it comes to making films and TV shows, as audiences, we don't really pay attention to stuff like language as much, maybe. But it's funny to hear how much has gone into it, but then also the fact that you had folders upon folders and big books of like, what could we use? And there's like as a thesaurus about let's change this word to this word, what would be period appropriate. But then I don't know, it gets quite, you were mentioning it gets quite nerdy, but at the same time, I think it's just also a testament to how much work that you guys put into it. You obviously want to do a good job on it because who doesn't want to do a good job when they're working on something? But then on top of that, it's the amount of work that does go into it, and it's not even like, I don't know what's finer than a tooth comb.
Yeah.
But it's like the equivalent of whatever was finer than a tooth comb that you guys have gone through it all. And then also when you're on set where there probably is a little bit more pressure because you have time restraints when you're on set anyway. But if you're there and they say, can we just think of what another word is for something like bath or them being sick, then I can imagine that like it's time for you guys to shine as well, to sort of step in and be like, use this word, and people are like, yeah, let's go.
It was, yeah, there was some pressure involved, but that's great. That's kind of why we like working in this industry, is the adrenaline of being on set and shooting, and you've got 2 minutes, come up with something. It's kind of terrifying and kind of exhilarating. But it's interesting what you say, that you don't think about it, and you don't. And that's the thing with our job, is that ideally nobody notices. It's like, I guess, with lots of different departments too. If you've done your job really, really well, no one will comment on the language, no one will comment on the accents, no one will notice it, because it just fits seamlessly with the world that you were trying to create. But the second that something isn't period, the second that you've got some modern language that pops in there, it's amazing how much it does take an audience out of it, and they do notice it. Even people who aren't particularly linguistic experts, they hear it, and it breaks the disbelief.
Yeah, no likes. We're never like anything. That was the big one. Can't say like. No one said like in the 40s. But I think also we were both, speak for myself, but I'm sure you agree, Helen, to be a part of Masters of the Air, sort of the third in the Band of Brothers in the Pacific trilogy. It's such an honor, and you feel such a delight to be a part of that production. I mean, Band of Brothers was epic. The Pacific was epic. And it's such, these guys are pros. They know what they're doing. And you also, it's history. You sort of feel an obligation to history to get it right. So it was pretty, yeah, we went all in, didn't we, Helen?
We did. We really did.
So it's again interesting about the like factor, because I feel like, excuse that sort of pun there, that we as a society use that quite a lot when talking. And I think once you pick up somebody saying that quite a lot, it drives you crazy. I think the best example is when if you hear someone do an interview like live on after a football game or something, then people do say quite a lot, like, or or and once you pick that up, it must drive. I don't know if it would drive you crazy on set, but I think when I watch it on TV, it drives me a little bit crazy.
It really jumps out.
It depends what world you're creating, and if it's a modern day thing, it sounds appropriate, and it wouldn't drive me crazy because it would sound, it would sound right for 2024. But for the 1940s, yeah, it would drive me crazy, and it can't happen.
Did you ever sort out this? Did you ever think of doing like a jar for, like, a person has to put a pound in every time they say like, or something along those lines?
It's a very good idea. We'd have been rich, Bret.
We would. We would have been rich. They got very, we did have fun with them on set when it'd be like, that's not period. They started to catch themselves on things too. So it was pretty, we didn't have to, I personally, for me, I didn't have to do too much correction on that once we got rolling.
No, not really.
But yes, another one of mine was, we're all good.
Oh yeah.
Are you good? We're good. No, we're not good. I don't think we were good in the 40s. We're not all good.
Oh dear. But then again, that's it's important for you guys to catch that in your job and to basically iron it out from the actors so that they can be ready for set. But I guess as well as because the cast are quite young and you're still sort of growing into going from like a boy to a man, or a, a girl to a woman, or so on, you kind of, I guess, learn how to speak again, and probably helps you in the long run to know that you can cut out words like, or are you all good, or when it comes to everyday life. So I guess you're kind of teaching them life lessons as well in a way.
Maybe. I mean, poor guys.
But what I'm curious to know about is, you touched upon about the sessions and having your cabins and sitting down with actors, but how do the sessions work with actors? Is it a case that it's just going to be one-on-one, or do you do it in groups because there is such a large cast?
It varied a little. So predominantly it's one-on-one. So because they were all playing real people, everybody was from somewhere different. So you could broadly, some people were from the East Coast, the West Coast, the South, but all these men were real, and they were from different cities and different places. So yeah, we worked with them individually. What we kind of did a little bit later into the shoot, and when we were up and running, was we would do sessions sometimes with whole crews. So I think especially I mean I did a lot of the shoot in the volume unit, as it was called, which was where we shot the interiors of the planes. And so I would quite often do a session with the pilot and his co-pilot, because if you had one of them who was from the south, let's say, and one of them who was meant to be from the western states, what you needed to make sure of was that they could hold their own against each other, and they weren't going to get seduced towards each other's accent. So sometimes, and also just because of time, as you say, there were so many of them. So rather than running the scenes with me playing the other part, I would quite often have both of the actors in there running their lines together, so that we could kind of hear how the scene would sound and correct them kind of in situ. So we did a little bit of that, but certainly during the prep, all of that was just individual stuff.
When it comes to individual stuff, because you were mentioning about the role of a dialect coach, about that's this the way that the tongue moves, muscle movements. Do you sort of have a sort of list of things of what an actor will need to prepare for, and then allow them to prepare before your first session to see what they've been working on, and then sort of work back from there?
could certainly set what we would usually do was to send people some source material before the first session. So once they were cast, we would send just get in touch on email and send them over, as Bret said, the person that we had researched was going to be a good point of reference for them. And we would say, okay, get listening to this person, see what you hear, and then that could be a kind of starting point for them to bring to the first session. Is that what you meant?
Yes, because I guess in my mind, it's that as an actor, you're going to be prepared about how somebody will sound and how you'll be, what's the word? Not performing.
No, I think I know what you mean. Like when you're reading your script, when the actors are reading their part, they're going to be hearing it in a certain way, and
Yes,
it's not helpful if they're hearing it in an accent which isn't going to be the accent in the end. So it is good to get them listening to the right sort of material as early as possible, so they don't go down a blind alley.
yes, because I think there's certain actors who will record their lines in a monotonal voice and then build up from there afterwards when they read their lines, when they read back. So I guess each actor is different in the way that the way they prep, but it's kind of interesting to hear the sort of process of how they're going to build up their voice, how they're going to build up their sound. And as well that you mentioned that there's so many non-Americans in the show as well, so their prep and understanding is going to be slightly different, and your voice and tone and frequency will probably change as well. So you kind of have to keep on top of that before you step on to even prepping and understanding what needs to be tweaked as well.
A lot of the guys, I mean, some of the Tuskegees and I guess there were probably maybe 12, maybe more, 14 of pretty main characters had real audio recordings of from the people who they were playing. So they could hear the accent, go into detail on how they actually, but I don't think any of them, we didn't really, Helen and I think agree about this. We don't really go with making them sound vocally like the other person. It's just getting the accent right. So everything was in their own voices, just layering in the accent. It sort of gets complicated sometimes. We didn't want them to feel like they were taking on somebody else's voice. It can be distracting. We both were in agreement on that.
100%, because they've got to be free as an actor as well to have their full range in their voice so that they can express what it is they need to express. And if they hear the real guy and he had a much lower voice or something than them, then it's a bit of a trap to then kind of cut yourself off from the whole rest of your voice and just trap yourself in the bottom of your range. So it's about kind of finding the accent and then bringing it to their own voices.
What happens when you're working with actor and they find it difficult to grasp the accent or or even lose it when they're saying certain words? Are there not activities but tricks, yeah, sort of ways to I guess it's like in the King's Speech when he's saying certain words to keep it going so he doesn't lose that and lose his words.
I mean, I usually, if somebody can't hear it or has a hard time making the sound, with the shape of the mouth or what the lips are doing, or I usually just resort to letter combinations. I write it out and play around with everyone reads sounds differently. And I just play around with vowel combinations until they are making the right sound. It's not very scientific, but for me, that has, touch wood, tended to work, or it gets close enough. So we did a little bit of that, but mostly, everybody, that's kind of a cheat, but I think everyone was really good. Everybody worked so hard.
They worked so hard.
I've never known a group of young men and women, largely men though, who just worked so hard because they all felt the responsibility to their characters and to the show. It was good. It was good. There was not a lazy bone in that production.
No, there wasn't. I mean, I just jump in. I mean, what Brett says, absolutely, respelling it until you figure out how their brain works and how it's going to make sense for them. But sometimes you got to kind of have to read somebody quite quickly and just work out how their mind works. So, are they going to be a visual learner? In which case, spelling it out in a different way is probably going to do it for them. Or are they really physical? Do they need to be told, okay, it's the tip of your tongue, not the back of your tongue, or look in this mirror, look at your lips right now, can you see what you're doing? Look at my lips, that's different. Can so you can come at it from, for some people, once you show them a mirror and they start looking at their mouth, it suddenly clicks and they'll do the right thing. And for other people, it will just throw them for a loop and it won't work at all. So you've got to just kind of figure out the way in. And for some people, it can be that whatever their home accent is means that certain muscles in the mouth are just working in quite a different way from how they need to work. So it can be that, let's say, for example, the muscles in the back of the tongue are quite tense. And for an American accent, you need to be able to find quite a lot of looseness in those muscles. They need to be quite free to work. So if somebody's just, spent their whole life speaking in a particular way with a tense tongue root, then it might be that you need to spend a bit of time just doing some exercises, just like at the gym, using some weights and literally just toning up a muscle group. And then once you've done that, suddenly, okay, perhaps maybe they were hearing it in the first place, but they just physically couldn't do it because their tongue wouldn't let them. So there's kind of different strands you can pull at until you get the right outcome.
Yeah, you hit it all from all angles.
Mm-hmm.
But you're absolutely right. Everyone has a different way of learning. So you do have to get into somebody's brain quickly. And actually, even for us, Helen and I got into each other's brains. And I think we had to be able to, I think we teach in a similar way and we understand things in a similar way. We have a similar vibe. So we had a shorthand that we could understand. And then we also could understand each other's shorthands for the boys.
Mm-hmm.
Again, interesting to hear the sort of different techniques that you guys will use so the actors could grasp at it. Again, I understand that everybody works differently, but it's like watching a kid ride a bike in a way, probably, that that they know how to sort of do it, but it's that confidence and picking up and repetition of it all. And also with hearing people working hard and really wanting to nail how they sound is quite, I wouldn't, heartwarming's not the right word, but it's another thing of like more of a testament to people's work and how much effort goes into it all. And especially if your character's based on real life. For somebody in the real world, then you would work extra hard to nail it to make sure that you can be true to them and who they were as a person as well.
Sometimes you can also, the directors, if an actor's having a hard time getting a word or sound right, the directors will say, you'll go and say, can we change this word? Can we come up with an alternative word? And they're very amenable to that. We also had on this show, there were so many other actors. There was Hungarian, there was Polish, there was French, there was German. I mean, it goes on and on and on. So if an actor had a hard time maybe pronouncing an English word, or then we were able to change it, because we also had to work with European cast and you work with them to. You're taking into consideration when they speak, what would their English have been like in the 1940s? They were exposed to less media channels than we are now. So having to work to maybe lessen an accent or to strengthen an accent, all of those things too. So yeah, you get sort of forensic on this stuff, and they are, if someone is having a hard time with a certain sound, usually there's a way to work around it.
When you're working with casts who are from Europe and Eastern Europe, what is that like to delve into the research and way that they sound? Because you're right in terms of during that time, we wouldn't have your Netflixes or your Apple TVs, so people can watch those British shows. So they probably would have, again, limited info coming in. Where do you begin with your research there, and how people would be sounding during that time?
I think you start with how they sound now, where they are, and then the directors would often have a weigh in and say, I like the way that actor sounds just the way they are, leave them. Or, actually I'd like him to sound a little more German. I don't think he's sounding German enough. And then you go in with the actor and they very much will weigh in on sounds that they think is authentic to their native language, to then dial that sound up a little bit, layer stuff back in. And then for dialing sounds down, it's just generally, I find, to do with comprehensibility. If something's not comprehensible because somebody's command of the English language is not strong enough for that role, then you just go in and tweak a sound here and there. So you start with where they actually are.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, I agree 100%.
Yeah, because I can imagine, so I've got Eastern European heritage, so it's interesting to when you speak to the older generation, the way that they speak and how they sound compared to if I speak to people my age as well, in the ways sort of like words are pronounced, or even sometimes slang words that I have no idea that what they mean. Because I got taught certain words that were still used, or phrases that were used sort of way back in the sort of 40s, 50s, and 60s. There's like certain ways to tell the time that people look at you in a weird way because they have no idea what you're talking about.
That's
Um,
interesting. Yeah,
sorry.
and that's the type of thing that we for actors, I did find that there would be sometimes things that were scripted and the actors would say, oh, we would say it like this, not like that. So then you go to the director and you say, oh, this person is actually from Poland, and they would say they feel more comfortable saying this way. And they generally would say, let's change it. So we did have some changes like that to do with native language speakers who would sort of say, oh, this has obviously not been written. This sentence hasn't been structured the right way for how we would say it.
Isn't that crazy as well to think that like the structure of a sentence, how it was written, they'll need to change that. I guess that also comes down to like how things are translated, because you'd see a sentence that you'd see in English, but then if you have to translate it into another language, you would have to move words around just so that it's grammatically correct as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And we had a lot of that going on this. There were so many languages, and we had loads of translation happening all the time. Most of the actors were native speakers, so that really helped. And yeah, it was just sort of very collaborative with all of that.
Yeah, there was very good casting on this project. So it was very rare that you had somebody playing a German who didn't speak German. Well, it didn't happen. Everybody who was playing somebody German could speak German, and playing somebody Polish was Polish or spoke Polish. So you had that amazing resource right there in the actor themselves.
Because we would have been in trouble, right, Helen?
Yes,
Not our remit. Although you speak German, don't you?
I do speak German, but not well enough to be translating World War II German.
Yeah. No, we had yeah, we got there. We had someone on set in the production office who was amazing, and AD, one of the ADs, and she was constantly scrambling to translate German, and we had the German cast, and it was a very collaborative.
Again, that's again good by casting to be getting people who knew the language, because then you'd have to, whoever was the actor at the time would probably have to do a massive crash course on how they sounded and what it was like as well. And learning a language when you're at school was hard, but if you're an adult now, it's probably even harder, just so that you can grasp it and get used to the different words and dialects.
Mm.
You touched upon as well, with the collaboration with directors and how they would ask what certain words, if they wanted to change words whilst on set, just because it might be a bit too modern. But when you're working on a show that has so many different directors, and working in blocks, what is the collaboration like with that? And then furthermore, there's also military advisors on the show. What's the collaboration discussions that you have with them?
I think from the very beginning with the boot camp and the slang not dictionary document that all the fellows were given, everyone wanted to be sit in the world of the 40s. And as Helen was saying, what's an alternative word for vomit, or, there was constantly that going on with, let's do this, or how can we shake this up and make it really authentic and different, sound really like we're in the 40s. And so that tone was set from the beginning. And so we did shoot, consistently. So it was block 1 was episode 1 to 4, block 2 was 5 and 6. So with each director, the tone had already been set. So the actors were already in this world. So we just would continue down that path. And if something was scripted or a director had an idea in a later block to say this and it wasn't period, you would just go up and say, that's not totally period. Can we do this as an alt? And everyone was really just wanted to honor it. So that was straightforward. And then the military from Helen was on the plane unit. So she had a different experience. I was on the, with our military advisor. He was actually between both units, but he would, again, going up to him constantly and saying, Captain Di, can they say, did that sound right to you? No, he would say, or, back and so what about this? Just, so we were constantly run into the boys and say, can you do this instead of that? And so it was again, it's attention to detail, and he was great. And then Helen was on the,
when we were in the plane unit, we had Ty Ramey, who was a World War II aviation expert and an expert about the B-17 airplane in particular. So he was there dealing with all the flight sequences, telling which button would have been pushed first. It was all completely accurate. Those boys wouldn't really want to put them in charge of flying the plane, but they could have flown a plane. I mean, they really knew what they were doing. So Ty was there all the time. And when there's a lot of technical language in there, which with the best will in the world, we don't know that. We're not aviation experts. So just to have him there and be able to say, okay, this word, would this have been pronounced like this? Or when you're giving a bearing, do you say 038 or do you say 038? Or, how do you give a bearing? And he would know all of that information. And that was priceless. It was amazing because then everything's accurate. We're getting the language period accurate, and they're giving you that kind of absolute military aviation precision too.
With like the military aviation, I'm sure somebody would listen, if the audience member will listen and probably pick out saying that this could be wrong, this could be wrong. As I actually spoke to Captain Di a few weeks ago, saying those online commandos who will pick things out regarding being nitpicking about stuff on shows, which made me quite laugh because that was quite a good way of thinking, a good way of nicknaming those sort of people online. But even having someone on set who can say, even those little things where you said about 038 or 038 can really trip you up. And I think that kind of makes me picture the scene of Inglourious Basterds when they're in the bar and Michael Fassbender puts his hand up the wrong way to order drinks. And it's like things like that could trip people up when they're shooting, because it could be things that it will take the audience members out of what's happening on screen.
Absolutely. Well, we definitely endeavored. We did the best we could to try and keep it authentic. Fingers crossed.
I'm sure there'll be somewhere down in the deep dark, like depths of Reddit, that will come up with something and say something, but I don't think anyone will ever notice, and people will enjoy what they're hearing and your work. But what I'm curious to know about as well is that because you were split working on the plane unit, and then I guess we can say, Brett, for you working on the ground unit, what was your favorite scenes to work on?
Well, one of my favorite things actually was from the ground. It wasn't an airplane bit. So I did some of that stuff as well, which was, I loved the Belgium sequences. I think they were great fun. So I think they've just aired recently, episode 4. I really enjoyed that because there's just so much going on dramatically, lots of different languages, lots of different challenges. So some actors who spoke English as a second language and were working on their clarity, some who, although they spoke another language, didn't sound like they did and were having to dial an accent up, and then Brits playing Americans, and lots of different things all going on in one place. So that was quite fun. Plus we got to go and ride on a train for the day, which was quite a nice little jolly after weeks of sitting in the studio. So yeah, I really enjoyed those sequences. But I mean, the plane stuff was amazing. It was a really unusual way of working. I've never done a shoot like that before. So we had two big B-17 sections built in the studio, which were up on gimbals, up in the air with volume screens around them. And the actors would get loaded up into the plane, so up into, say, the cockpit section of the plane, and they would be up there then, for hours. They'd be up until lunchtime. And so if you wanted to speak to them, you couldn't go up to the airplane because they were up in the air. So they had little earpieces in, and there was a microphone. And so you would just sort of come and take the God mic and, hello, can you hear me? And deliver your notes that way into the cockpit. And sometimes, not even into the earpieces, just booming over the entire studio stage, which was, again, quite an interesting way of working, because our work is usually very discreet. You're normally taking an actor aside and whispering in their ear, letting them know, oh, that vowel just needs to shift a little bit, or remember this sound. So that was just an interesting new challenge for me professionally of how do you navigate that. And it was great fun. We had a really good time doing that. So yeah, I enjoyed all of those sequences, all the plane bits.
I think I liked the in the officers hall, where, what was it called? The officers, not the mess.
No, club, was it?
The club, yes, the club. That's, of course, that's what it's called. All the dancing sequences, the music, and it got really intense, as the show went on. It was, because it's the war, and it just got heavier and heavier with the prisoner of war camps and the guns and the dogs and everyone screaming at each other. And so for me, the light dancing and the singing and the big band stuff was very uplifting and fun.
So you mentioned something about the band. So there's a couple of things I was kind of want to just follow up very quickly on. When you mentioned about the band and people singing, and how do you guys get involved in something like that as well? Or is that done, or somebody else get involved with the whole singing part? Because I can imagine that if somebody is a British actor and they're singing in an American accent, then that would change the way that they sort of prepare and the sort of confidence they need to build up to get to that scene.
I think, yeah, you would be involved. I mean, I would usually expect the actor to run it by me, the singing, from an accent point of view, just to say, just like you would dialogue. But then in terms of how to sing it, and the technique of singing, they better not ask me. I mean, they
they're on their own.
Or if they do.
There's usually, usually they are sort of separate, I find. There's singing people. I don't think did we have singing people on
I don't
this?
think there was a singing person on this. I think that there was a musical director. I remember him. He was great, who was working with the musicians, working with the band. And I think I think that the producers were quite hands-on with the singing, weren't they?
They were, because they're very into music is their thing. No, but this was, and I think they were also singing. Yeah, they didn't really need any dialect backup on this for their singing.
Okay, because again, that's another must be another minefield for people to deal with if they're singing in an accent that's not theirs, and then the way that they would say words as well, and the tone, and yeah, again, it puts my head in a bit of a spin.
It can be really a real sort of minefield, actually, because people quite often, when they sing, not for this, because the most of the singing would have been in American, but quite often people, when they sing, want to go into an American accent. So certainly when I've worked on musicals before, then I definitely do work with people on the singing, because you want to say, okay, how your character speaks in everyday life translates to when they sing. You don't want to have a different voice that kind of kicks in, because then you get this sort of two different sides of a character. So yeah, I mean, I think it's got to be consistent.
Yeah, and again, hats off to you guys and your work on that, because there's probably so much that needs to be taken into consideration and kind of ironed out from people about how what they're doing wrong and what they need to change. But then there's also, I'm curious to know about something else, which this is a slight tangent to what you guys do, but because you guys work on so many different sets and see how they see the final product of the set. So if it's either, say, for example, like an office space or somewhere that has a lot of green screen. But you're mentioning about the planes and being in the stage of volume. What is that like, as like being involved with something like that and seeing that in front of your eyes compared to other sets?
It was amazing to have those volume screens, so that, and the gimbal, which really moved with the images that the actors were seeing. I think it was just incredible. It just made that the experience, because they were shooting these plane sequences for a really long time. They would be there for weeks at a time shooting one mission. And I think if they were doing all of that acting with green screen and marks and tennis balls, that would have become quite a difficult technical exercise. But having these volume screens, it meant it was so alive. It was so, it was so real and vivid. So yeah, I think it was an amazing way of working.
Yeah, because I think once you see how quickly technology has changed
Mm.
and what they can produce now, it's incredible. And like as an actor, not being next to a tennis ball probably helps massively in the way that you behave and
Yeah,
react to things.
Well, they
yeah,
had the black exploding and planes coming at them, and they were really, they programmed these. I'm only got to see it at the end, but they, these huge stations, didn't they, Helen, with just computers, and they were constantly
oh yeah.
programming the battles and programming the where the bombs were dropped. They would program the what the cities looked like. So the everyone's looking down at what it, as close as it could have been to what it was actually like.
It was like a whole other little crew sitting in the stage, and when we were ready to call action, they would say, action volume, and they would start running running the, I don't know what they call it, running the simulation or running, the images on the screen, and then an action plane, and then the plane would start. So yeah, it was a massive undertaking, huge piece of work. We should interview them, bro.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that would be interesting as well. But I think as well as crew who are not involved with it, but you see so many sets, it must be sort of, well, like, wow, this is like, holy crap, I can't believe they've moved on to something like this. And you can see every visual, and then also like the gimbal movement, like blows my mind a little bit about how much has changed as well. But then it makes me feel like an old man being like, oh, back in my day, used to be tennis balls and blue screens.
And it still is a lot of the time. This was something quite special. It blew my mind, especially. So there was one section which was the cockpit, and then there was the other section which was the belly of the plane where the gunners were, and it was huge. It was like an enormous airplane that they could actually move through and walk through, and having that built there it was so accurate. It was incredible, and yeah, very different than if it had just been, a half plane set or something. I think it felt very real for these guys.
Yeah, and it would have been incredible to see, and also with all like the set decorating with the inside of how they probably have to use certain components that they can't, that they're probably next to impossible to find.
It
And
was it was mind-boggling. It was absolutely staggering to see those things. Really.
yeah, and again, I want if would be so interesting to see if you took someone out from the 100, you had a time machine and you brought them to the set of there, what they must think of that.
Mm.
How they'll probably be like, wow, this is actually what I was happening yesterday when I was up in the air. But the power of filmmaking, eh? Or TV making, should I say? Sorry. Um, what would you say was the hardest dialect to create?
Probably the hardest thing, I think, was not one particular region, but just making those kind of calls about how accurate do we want to go here? Because there are many recordings really that exist from that kind of time period. The majority of people in the world haven't really heard what a regional, let's say, Pennsylvania accent from the 1940s sounded like. And there was much greater accent variety. And in that period than there is now, things have kind of become a bit more leveled off and a bit more homogenized. So making those decisions of, do we go completely accurate here? Or actually, if we make that call, is that going to take an audience out of it? And it sounds like, oh, that British guy made a mistake when he said that word. So an example is that one of the real guys that we had a recording of, who was from the East Coast, said Africa. So added an R on the end of that word because he's from a region where R's get dropped. I'm getting geeky now, but from a region where they don't pronounce all of their R's, but they do add in extra ones. And so we had this recording of this guy saying, yeah, we flew to Africa. And then it's this decision of, well, that's real and it's there and the guy's saying it and the actor can hear that the guy's saying it, but do we want to do that because an audience doesn't have any of that backstory? And I think in the end we didn't do that, did we, Brett?
No, we decided because thought it might sound like he was making a mistake as a British, or he was being British about it. So no, we took that out.
So that was hard. And then there were things like there are some vowel splits and that existed in that period which don't really exist now. They do in like some areas, but not that much. So for example, this is nerdy now. You ready for this, Rob? So horse as in the animal horse, and horse as in I've got a horse throat. Now, pretty much everyone in the UK, most people apart from say those two words the same, horse, horse. And in America now, pretty much everybody says them the same, horse, horse. But in this time period, a lot of America said those words differently. So horse, the animal, and horse, a horse throat. You hear the difference?
Can I get one more time, please?
So the horse was horse.
I can kind of hear it a little bit.
So to us, this is mammoth. This is like so different. Anyway, to an accent geek, this is a big deal. And something like that, where it doesn't really exist that much in modern accents. So even to know which words go which way in the split, to get into formation or formation takes a lot of research. And we had dictionaries from the 1950s with phonetics in them to tell us which way words would go. So that was quite hard because it's just a little bit uncharted territory. It's the sort of sound that you don't, something which is set in the 40s in America, perhaps you do that, but this is so accurate and they are real people and we're striving so much for realism that you're more likely to do it on this project, I think, than you are anywhere else. And that split we did put that in for the characters. So that was pretty challenging because that meant forensically going through the script, looking for every vowel, every time that vowel comes up, using our reference material to work out which way it went and making sure the actor then knew. So yeah, that's something that was hard, but great fun.
I would agree with all of that. All of that.
I just think as well, like as you said, how certain words can sound very similar, and then I guess because you're giving me examples that I should be listening out for, and I can hear the difference, but then it must, as you said, for those people who like the vocal sounds and dialect coaches and nerds about it, 'cause it's like that goes really deep into it, and like as an audience member, I don't think you'd really notice unless you saw someone on screen with a horse and they said a horse, or they were saying their voice, because it is difficult to distinguish the two unless you're really, really listening out for it. But I guess that's also something that's like comes down to how you both work and how you want to make sure that you've got it correct and that it does sound different and that it is important that there is a distinction to it. it could be quite easy for someone to get lazy to say, no, don't worry, we can just brush it under the carpet or fix it in post, for example.
Fix it in post. That's the never ending. The actors usually like it. On this, they liked it. They liked doing those things because it gave them something to sort of cling on to for maybe the character and also the period. Another thing that we had was we found that for the most part at that time, they would say eventually, December, remember, rather than remember, December, eventually. So we would, going in and get before, not before. So you'd go in with certain pronunciations, and I remember them really liking, the guys really liking that, because it was just gave them a little bit of a different flavor of not the way that they would say it nowadays.
I think as well, you would, I think my wife would love to hear stuff like that because I sometimes do get corrected on the way I pronounce things, and hearing that she'll probably geek out a little bit by knowing that there's going to be differentiations of certain words and how people would take that on and make sure that they're cracking the right word. Just to wrap up the episode, what was your favorite dialect to create, or is it the case of like picking your favorite child? That is impossible.
I don't, I feel like we did everything. We did these breakdowns of the regions together, and we made all these decisions together, and we sort of crafted this thing together. So we had a real partnership and team, and that was really fun. I don't think there was anything, there wasn't one thing that was harder, or I don't, do you think, Helen? I feel like it was all very.
I think that was what I enjoyed the most. That was just exploring the diversity and the range. It's really rare on a project to be asked to, cover the entire United States. Something's usually set in one place, and that's it. And so that was, I think, my favorite was just getting to really explore the range and the diversity of all those different accents at that time, and to have a colleague to do it with, which is so rare.
It was great. And also to be able to, do the slang stuff together. And that was, for me, that was really the most exciting part, was to be able to dive into the 40s and have this whole new world of vocabulary and turn of phrase. And we were constantly on set. I mean, I would be in an area with maybe I'd left my book down in my trailer or something and texting Helen, what's the word for whatever. I knew we were always armed wherever we were with a slang book, one of us. So we always had the other person to be able to say, help, I need this. Just by we were miles away from each other.
Yeah.
I think as well, like, with a slang book, are there words there that you sometimes would look at to say, oh, I wish they would bring this back? Or are there words that they still use today?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Great ones, much more creative and colourful ways of expressing things in the 1940s.
I feel like now we're getting very lazy with words then. I think we need to maybe bring some words back then in the future.
Yeah, let's do it.
There's also something, sorry, there's something that popped into my head. I know this is like not this is kind of like final question 1.5. But in the first episode, there's a really clever scene where they start putting not dots down about where people are from on the map of America. And that seems like quite a nice touch to distinguish of like who's from where. When it came to something like that, I'm not sure if this does come down to you guys, but is this a case of like making it easier for audiences to understand where the characters are from so that you can watch out for the way that they sound as well?
No, I think that was always in the script. That whole scene was in the script, but we had in our porta cabins, we had map of the United States, and each actor got a pin and they stuck it in. I wish I'd taken a picture of that at the end. That would have been pretty magnificent. I mean, the pins wouldn't fit. There was, hundreds of them.
Yeah, but I think that's just a true story, right? That's just what really happened.
Yeah, I think that is what happened in Greenland when they got there.
Yeah, WS1. I'm in my aviation terminology, but yes, in Greenland rather. Yeah, I mean, it's certainly it is useful. It is nice to have an audience, have a scene like that early in the show, just to signpost for them. These guys aren't meant to all sound the same. They're from all over the continent, just so you're aware. That is it certainly is a useful storytelling device, but I think it was just a true story.
Hmm.
Okay, cool. Yeah, because I know this is gonna sound really lazy as an audience member, but you could always just say that all Americans sound the same, all North Americans sound the same. But once you get an idea of, because America is such a vast place, that you've got this one person from the South, one person from the West, Midwest, East Coast, and so on, then you kind of get an actual understanding of they'll all sound the same, or they all sound different, sorry, and their type of slang they might use will be different as well. But yes, it's interesting. Helen, Brett, thank you so much for your time today. Masters of the Air is streaming now on Apple TV Plus. Go out and listen to Helen and Brett's work and yeah, take it all in. Thank you again, guys.
Thank you.
It's just been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You take care and bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening. Please subscribe, rate, and review this podcast.